Why hello there and welcome back. I've been all over the place with my reviews lately, and that ongoing mainline Mario marathon has more or less taken a backseat. Doing a long marathon like this can get tedious on occasion, so it's a good idea to do other videos to prevent franchise fatigue. Well, now I'm back in the mood to do more Mario videos. I am closing in on the end of the marathon, but given how I'm such a nitpicky bitch, these videos will probably be ridiculously long. So I might as well get back into the series and finish the job so I can move on to greener pastures. Anyway, the last Mario games I covered on this channel were the Galaxy Duo, and 64 DS I suppose, but that's beside the point. I had a lot of problems with them, including the more restrictive level design that I don't personally prefer for 3D Mario, the wonky motion controls, some padding and undercooked gameplay gimmicks, the gruelingly obnoxious full completion campaigns, stiffer controls than previous entries, and so on, but don't take all this bitching as me disliking those games. Both were still solid Mario experiences that I quite enjoyed overall, and I think the gravity mechanics were really damn cool. I just found them to have more issues than most people tend to point out. You can still enjoy something even if it's heavily flawed. Hell, many of the games I enjoy have tons of problems I can point out, but in spite of all that, I still like them, and the Super Mario Galaxy games certainly fall under that umbrella. As I said, not my ideal idea of a 3D Mario game, but games I can enjoy on their own merits. With that said, my idea that these games are good in spite of a lot of flaws is certainly not perfectly in line with their greater reception. These games were seemingly considered near flawless masterpieces upon their initial release, and were lauded as some of, if not the best Mario games ever made. To this day, this seems to be the general consensus. If someone doesn't think Super Mario Bros. 3 or Super Mario World is the best one, then chances are they'll say either of the Galaxy games. This overwhelmingly positive reception was matched by incredible sales of both the games themselves and the Wii console, which was certainly what Nintendo needed after the relatively poor sales of their previous console, the GameCube. However, the Wii and the Mario Galaxy games weren't the only things that helped in the financial recovery of Nintendo and its flagship series. Around the same time, there was another system release that would spawn one of the Mario series best-selling subsets. I'm of course referring to the DS and the new Super Mario Bros. Games, which I'll be covering in today's video. All the way back in 2004, while the GameCube was struggling to make a financial impact in the industry, despite how great it was, Nintendo's handhelds were more or less business as usual. Tyranny, essentially. Ever since the Game Boy graced the world all the way back in 1989, Nintendo has had a soft monopoly on handheld gaming. While there were competitors that emerged over the years, such as the Game Gear in the 90s and the PSP around the same time as the DS, none of them were able to come close to toppling the Big N's stranglehold on the market. Nowadays, things are a bit different because of mobile gaming and the Switch, but back when Nintendo made dedicated handhelds, they were undeniably the kings of the market. In the early 2000s, the Game Boy Advance was doing well, but Nintendo felt they had basically reached the peak of what the Game Boy line could do. Maybe, I don't know if they actually thought that, but that's the impression I get. Either way, they started development on a new dual-screen handheld featuring a touchscreen that would eventually become the DS. It was initially revealed in 2003, but Nintendo made it clear that it wasn't a successor to the GBA and was rather a third pillar of sorts. It was a successor to the damn thing had a GBA slot on the bottom. Who did Nintendo think they were fooling here? This is basically business speak for, we want to release a new handheld, but dear God, please don't stop buying the GBA because it's also making us tons of money. Regardless of their typical weird marketing decisions, the DS would... well, you know. It came out in 2004, and went on to become the second best-selling console ever, right behind the PlayStation 2, of course. A fact I seemingly can't stop bringing up in every single last fucking video I make. But yeah, the DS sold like hotcakes and undeniably shaped countless childhoods, including my own. This was the first game console that I had all to myself. I shared the PS3, Wii, and Xbox 360 with my brother. One of my cousins owned a PS2 and another a GameCube, and I didn't get my own computer for years afterward, so that red and black DS Lite was the only thing I could use to play games for as long as I wanted. Well, until my parents told me to go to bed, because I was a kid after all. I didn't have a lot of games for it, and still don't really, but most of what I played back then I had fun with. Super Mario 64 DS, Mario Kart DS, Lego Batman, Pokemon Platinum, Heart Gold and White, and of course, New Super Mario Bros. Released in 2006. I just remember spending countless hours playing this one, along with the 64 DS, before I got the original version on Virtual Console, and the Pokemon games. It was one of the first Mario games I ever owned, and while back then I can distinctly remember it being my least favorite of the three I had, I still enjoyed it. Back then, that seemed to be the general sentiment. You wouldn't get this impression now, but there was once a time when this game was considered an instant classic that would be revered alongside games like Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World for years to come. I know, sounds like some batshit insane Alex Jones revisionist history conspiracy theory shit, but when analyzing this game and the context around it in a vacuum, it isn't impossible to see why. By the mid-2000s, people who grew up with the classic 2D Mario games were growing older. While this led to a trend of games growing ever more mature, these new adults still reminisced about their childhoods playing the early Mario games and their contemporaries. I'm willing to bet this was only furthered by the release of the Mario Advance remakes, as they reminded many people of these days. Nintendo saw this, and boy, oh boy, did they capitalize on it. By this point, it had been 14 years since the last 2D Mario game, the last non-spin-off 2D Mario game. Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins. A great game that is unfortunately criminally overlooked, even today. Anyways, this would be the final 2D Mario game for the time being, and Nintendo would instead focus on 3D Mario, starting with the N64. The only 2D Mario action the world would see during this era was restricted to Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance remakes of games that were already remade on the SNES. Many people were itching for a new 2D Mario game, and come 2006, this dream would become a reality with New Super Mario Bros. As I said, this is the game I think was responsible for the retro revival era, as it ignited the nostalgia of many adults who had played the 2D Mario games back in the 1990s. The game would then go on to sell millions, and the rest is history. Well, sort of. My point is, back then, there was only one New Super Mario Bros. Game, so it was analyzed as such. An original 2D Mario game, something that hadn't been made in over a decade. While this great reception would initially last, in the future, the dynamic would heavily shift, let's just say. But I'll get more into that later. It's time to take a look at the New Super Mario Bros. Games, yes, all of them in one video, and give my thoughts on each one. Of course, that entails my opinions on the games themselves, as well as how they fit into the Mario series at large. Alright, enough beating around the bush, here we go. The New Super Mario Bros. Series, given the full review treatment, starting with, of course, the original game. As I said, this game is a return to the more traditional 2D Mario gameplay following the relatively experimental collectathon stuff from the N64 and GameCube, and that's even down to how it opens up. The console games from this era featured Mario talking to the player along with cutscenes, and in Mario 64's case, his face. But this game just goes straight to the title screen with a catchy tune playing in the background, much like the early games. In line with this is the story, which is as simple as it gets. Bowser Jr. causes a distraction for Mario at Peach's castle, and then swoops in and takes the princess away. Now you have to get her back. Bowser's also here, sort of. I'll have to agree with Scott the Wise. Bowser Jr. is essentially the main villain here. That's slightly refreshing, I suppose. It really doesn't feel any different from the usual tired old plot everyone has come to expect from these games by now. This doesn't really bother me much here, but put a pin on that for when I discuss the other games in the subseries. It's clear to me that the game itself is the main focus here, as it is in every other mainline Mario platformer. As soon as the short intro cutscene is over, you're dropped right into the between-level world map, and immediately as this happens, you get a glimpse of how the game looks. Well, that was also the case on the title screen, but shut your mouth. This game is appropriately colorful for a Mario game and has decent visuals in general. I'm playing this game on an emulator because I have no other way to record handheld games. Also, no, I didn't up-res the game because I hate how that looks. I much prefer the sharp pixel look you see now. Regardless of that, I think this game looks fine, especially by DS standards. On a purely objective level, it's probably the best looking 2D Mario game I've reviewed yet, but on a personal preference level, I like the art style of the previous games more. And yes, that does include the black and white Game Boy games. They just had way more interesting art direction. Super Mario Bros. 3 went for a stage play type aesthetic. The land games had rather unique ideas for levels, such as a bamboo forest or a huge Mecha Mario. And even Super Mario World was set on a dinosaur island. The 3D games only further signaled that things wouldn't be samey in the future. Yeah, sure, Super Mario 64 more or less recycled the level themes from 3 and World, but for the first 3D entry, I think that's fine, and it even had a few original ideas of its own. Sunshine featured a tropical setting with its own unique spins on it, along with really creative visuals in many areas, and a beyond vibrant color palette, leading to my favorite looking entry in the series, and I'm letting my bias show again, aren't I? In comparison to many of these games, New Super Mario Bros.' art direction isn't as interesting. In going back to the simplicity of the early Mario games, it brought back those level tropes. You know, the grassy field, the desert, the tundra, the lava volcano castle world, etc. It just isn't as interesting to look at as many of the other games. I won't fault them for doing this in this particular instance, because this was the first 2D Mario game in over 10 years when it came out. Like SM64, it's understandable they'd play it safe for the theming to ease players into it. This really only becomes an issue when you factor in the later games, but I'm strictly talking about the DS game right now, as mentioned. Just like the graphics, the music of New Super Mario Bros. Is harmless in a vacuum, but given time would go on to affect the series tremendously. For what it is, the soundtrack of this game is well composed and decently catchy. Not as much of a banger as something like, say, Mario 3 or Mario 64, but good. I don't particularly care for the a cappella elements of the music. You know, yeah, that. It's not so bad in this game, but just you wait. Painfully on the nose foreshadowing aside, this is my favorite soundtrack from the New Super Mario Bros. Series, for the simple reason that it has songs which are exclusive to it. The game goes for a jazz-inspired soundtrack, a direction Mario has more or less been defined by since the beginning. On top of that, there's a few tracks that are more atmospheric to counteract the energetic stuff. Many of them are also appropriate for the environment they play in. The tropical world makes heavy use of steel pan drums to evoke the feeling of spending a day at the beach. The desert world emphasizes the scorching sun and sand, and the tundra world features bells and such that create the proper feeling of the winter season. Absolute fucking misery. Oh shit, wait, did I just say that out loud? Anyway, have a listen to some of my favorites. As you can clearly hear, that soundtrack slaps. If I had to choose a song to be my favorite, I would easily pick the beach stage theme. Yada yada, my bias is showing again, but I don't give a shit. That song is just really good, and in terms of tropical Mario music, I'd say it actually rivals many of the tracks from Sunshine. Also, the Invincibility theme is the wing cap song from Super Mario 64. Now that's what I call based. I'm glad these new Millennium Mario games know that this is the best version of that song. That's basically all I have to say on this topic. The soundtrack in this game is solid, but again, keep that in mind for the remainder of this video. As I've been saying, New Super Mario Bros. Was the first 2D Mario game in a decade and a half when it came out. It was intended to be a close recreation of the classic games, but with modern hardware and all the advantages it brings to the table. I've gone on record saying I prefer 3D Mario overall, but this is fine too. I reviewed all the previous 2D games, well except for any version of Lost Levels or Mario 2, positively. Mario is just like Sonic to me in this regard. I told you I'd reference him! Where I generally prefer the 3D games, but also get a fair amount of enjoyment from the 2D stuff. I think what they did during this generation was the best thing they could have done. Have the big 3D Mario releases on home consoles, while going for more retro-style 2D gameplay on the handhelds. The game's control scheme is very simple and easy to pick up. If you've ever played a side-scroller in your life, you already know how to play this. Mario runs, he jumps, and he can stomp at enemies to take them out. It's about as smooth and responsive as you can hope for. In addition to this, New Super Mario Bros. Also incorporates some of the more advanced moves from the 3D games, like double and triple jumps, wall jumps, and the ground pound. These moves add welcome extra depth to the stages, allowing for more verticality in general. With that said though, I can't help but prefer the handling of some of the older games. I mean in terms of the actual physics. Mario 3, World, and Land 2 were just so perfect as far as controls went, and by contrast, New Super Mario Bros. Is a little more stiff, slightly more slippery and floaty. Don't know exactly what it is, but there's a subtle difference that leads me to that conclusion. Regardless of that though, controlling this game is very easy to get a hang of. What's also easy to get a hang of is the power-ups. Well, at least the returning ones. As usual, we have the typical Mushroom, Fire Flower, and Starman, which are as useful as ever. I have nothing new to say here. What I do have something to say about is the new power-ups this game adds, all three of which I think are kinda bad. First off, the Mini Mushroom is quite literally a power down. It is admittedly funny looking, but lord is it useless for me. Mario dies in one hit and his jumps become terrible with how overly floaty they are. The only real benefits this provides are running on water and entering specialized areas. You know, there was a certain word for something like this, you know, I just can't remember it, you know. Oh yeah, situational. The blue shell is a little better since you don't have the durability of a sugar glass bottle, but I still don't like it because as soon as you run, Mario enters the shell. He can then bounce off walls and into pits. It's not fun to use. Finally, we have the Mega Mushroom, which is featured on the game's box art. It's pretty clear this is what they wanted to market the game with, but it's a total gimmick. It pretty much only works out in a very special area is designed for it, and on its face is merely an instant win button. When I was a kid, I thought this was the coolest shit ever, but now that I'm a cynical adult with no tolerance for BS, I think it totally trivializes the game, so I don't use it. It is admittedly funny you can destroy the goalpost at the end of the stage, but beyond that it's a marketing gimmick. Although speaking of finishing this stage, obviously this game is a 2D platformer, so the goal is simply to reach the end of each stage, which are once again linear obstacle courses. I know that transition was really bad, but I never said I was good at them. Anyway, the level design in this game is about what you'd expect. You've got platforming challenges that ask you to take out enemies that get in your way, and avoid bottomless pits or other hazards. It's nothing mind-blowing, and minus the new moves Mario has, it plays almost exactly like the earlier 2D Mario games. But that certainly isn't a bad thing. The game does start out incredibly easy, but by the end there's more challenging platforming that provides a decent enough skill test. With the exception of the first half of World 8, which I just find to be a pain in the ass, there's also very little bullshit or annoying fake difficulty to speak of. Oh, and the water levels are easily the most tedious they've been in the series so far, so there's that too. But back to what I was saying. Whether or not you can beat a stage is all down to your own level of skill, which I admit may sound pretty basic and silly to praise, but you'd be shocked with how many side-scrollers in particular screw this up. So yeah, that's nice, but merely having solid level design on a base level often leads to good games that end up being unmemorable. Unfortunately, New Super Mario Bros. Kind of falls flat in this regard for me. It isn't completely lacking in interesting set pieces or moments. There's things like swinging poles, these one-directional doors in this sewer level, the trampolines that cause Mario to spin in midair, horizontal screen wrap sections, tilting platforms, and so on, which are used for some interesting levels. Also, need I mention this huge-ass eel who's back from Jolly Roger Bay and with a vengeance? Outside of these cherry-picked moments, though, this game feels pretty standard and kinda dry. In fact, when I think about it, most of those set pieces I picked out are just ideas reused from previous games. Not that that makes them uninteresting in and of themselves, in this particular case at least, but I don't know. For whatever reason, I don't come back to this game nearly as much as Mario 3, World, or Land 2. And I think it comes down to most of the game's levels being mostly reused concepts. Basically, everything you find in this game, you can find in pretty much any other Mario game. Oh well, at least the exploration value somewhat makes up for it. Like Super Mario World, New Super Mario Bros. Has a fair share of secret exits that lead to alternate routes in the world map. I praise Super Mario World for this because it offers tons of options to progress through the game without feeling the need to make the levels these mazes that are overcomplicated for the sake of it. And New Super Mario Bros. Bros. Does the same thing, albeit not quite to the extent that World does, but at a respectable level. On top of that, the World map allows you to buy different paths with star coins, an evolution of the Dragon coins from Super Mario World. Whereas they were just for extra lives there, here you're allowed to use them to gain access to hidden paths or toad houses. Thankfully, collecting them is completely optional, so if you don't want to go for them, you don't have to. Now that for sure sounds silly to praise, but I can't tell you how much I hate it when a linear platformer tries to incorporate mandatory collectathon elements where they don't belong. Not that I'm referring to any game in particular. This game doesn't fall into that trap, but keep that in mind for a certain future video in this marathon. In general, this stuff makes New Super Mario Bros. Come off as much less restrictive, and it exemplifies one of the many things I love about this series. It gives the player a certain amount of freedom without being overwhelming or causing the game to seem aimless. On the whole, the main campaign of New Super Mario Bros., while not as replayable as many of the past games, has plenty of its own merits. But that isn't all. New Super Mario Bros. Isn't just the main campaign, and it has some mini-games and side modes. These things increase its package value. I always praise stuff like this when done well, even if I don't always play it, because if you ever get bored or in the mood to do something else while playing the main story, you have all this extra content to mess around with. The Sonic Adventure games were excellent at doing this, but honestly, Mario hasn't always been. In fact, thinking about it, only the handheld games really have any sort of side content like this. Honestly though, that makes sense to me. You're obviously meant to bring handheld games with you when traveling, which means they're often more simple and limited. Optional minigames are a great way to keep the player interested, on like a road trip or something. For the people of my generation, I don't think these minigames need much introduction. We all remember countless hours just playing these things on road trips, over at grandma's house, or even just sitting inside at home with nothing else to do. I just remember losing hours of my life to Wanted, Ba-Bomb Squad, and others. These are the same minigames from the Rec Room and 64DS, except this time you don't have to unlock them. That's good, it means I can actually show footage of them because screw trying to unlock them in that game. I'd say many of these minigames hold up pretty decently. None of them are as challenging as they seemed back in the day because I'm a fully grown man now, but they're still a fun distraction. The game also has a multiplayer versus mode where you and another person see who can collect more stars. I can't play it because this is on an emulator, not like I have anyone to play it with either, but I still remember the countless hours I spent playing this with my brother fondly. I don't have anything more to say about New Super Mario Bros. On the DS. While it's not very standout and I wouldn't call it one of the greatest Mario games ever made by any stretch of the imagination, it was and still is solid in its own right, and how I'd even say slightly overlooked. Not to the extent of the Game Boy games, but somewhat overlooked all the same. My biggest criticism is that it feels like a bit on the safe side, but for the first original 2D Mario game in 14 years at the time of release, it's understandable. If anything, this game was a demonstration that 2D Mario, along with retro-style game design in general, still had an audience. It became a huge hit that broke sales records, and in fact remains in the top 20 best-selling games ever to this day. With that said, you better believe it had a gigantic ripple effect on not just Nintendo, but the gaming industry at large. I implied this earlier, but I personally think New Super Mario Bros. Was the origin point, or at least a huge benefactor for the nostalgia boom that would transpire shortly after its release. On top of that, it was the game that signaled to Nintendo that they should further explore this avenue, as it had tons of money-making potential. And after the GameCube era's relatively low returns, this was just what they needed. Despite it being a solid enough game, though, New Super Mario Bros. Triggered the start of something concerning. The game would pave the way towards a deterioration of sorts. That metamorphosis wouldn't become fully apparent immediately, but the signs of change would begin to show up in due time. On that note, next on the menu is the successor to this game, New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Okay, before I start this one off, I want to address something about my footage. You may notice that at some points, the hue seems shifted from what it should be. Well, I tried using a different set of component cables for recording, and as I was playing, I thought the hue randomly shifting was my TV being a prankster, because yes, it has done that before. Turns out, the cables are just fucking shit. I'll try my best to color correct it in post, but if the footage ever seems oddly colored, that's why. Needless to say, it's annoying, but I'm not mad, just disappointed. With that said, New Super Mario Bros. Wii. Examining this game today, it may appear fairly lazy on the surface. It's another New Super Mario Bros. Game 3 years after the DS one, and it looks and sounds practically the same. That seed I mentioned that New Super Mario Bros. Planted, it was already showing signs of germination. Yeah, I'm just great at subtlety, aren't I? Regardless, that's how many people feel about this game looking back, and that perspective is certainly justified to an extent. However, when you look at New Super Mario Bros. Wii when it was released, these things start to become a little more understandable, for lack of a better term. When New Super Mario Bros. Wii was being developed, one of its goals was to have co-op multiplayer, something Miyamoto apparently wanted to implement since the original Mario Bros. Arcade game, but always couldn't because of technical limitations. The most notable case was with Super Mario 64 and its cancelled sequel, where they tried to implement it but ultimately failed. On top of this, New Super Mario Bros. Wii would be the first non-remake 2D Mario game on a home console since Super Mario World. Given this fact, as well as the aforementioned rocky history of trying to implement multiplayer in the series, it makes more sense why they would play it safe. It doesn't make it less underwhelming, but I can see why. With all that said, I better tell my story with this one, as out of all the Mario games, it's probably the most important. I've mentioned this in videos before, but New Super Mario Bros. Wii was actually my first Mario game, game, at least as far as I remember. It was the game that introduced me to this iconic series. I'm willing to bet my mom and dad picked it up alongside the Wii to introduce me and my brother to the series, as they grew up with an NES themselves and recognized the character. Like I said in my Mario Galaxy reviews, I have no idea when they bought that thing. Probably around 2009, which is when the game came out. I just remember spending hours playing it in co-op mode, specifically when I tried to beat the first boss and failed miserably. I thought this game was really hard back in the day, but then again I was a kid, so every game was impossible. The point of the matter here is that this game introduced me to Mario, and is the entire reason I'm the Mario fan, or I mean Mario enjoyer that I am today. Side note, but I've really started to hate the word fan to describe someone who simply enjoys something. The word just makes me think of an obsessive, sweaty, middle-aged, no-life loser that jerks off to hentai all day or some shit. But I'm getting off topic. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, Funny Red Plumber Man. Back then I loved this game almost unconditionally, even if I was terrible at it. It led to me making numerous drawings of the character, constantly talking about it, and of course playing any more games in the series that I can get my hands on. The Wii was just such a perfect time to be into this stuff, because not only did it have its own exclusive Mario games, it also had all the old classics on Virtual Console. As I went over in this marathon more than once by now, that's how I would get to play the original 8-bit quadrilogy, Mario World, 64, the Galaxy games, and even some spin-offs like Mario Kart, Paper Mario, and Smash Bros. I could have even played Sunshine if I had known about the Wii's backwards compatibility. And of all things, I have a new Super Mario Bros. Game to thank for it. It's ultimately the reason I love this series today. That being said, when I was in high school, I would come back to this game and came to the unfortunate realization it wasn't quite as amazing as I remembered. I didn't hate the game, but I found it underwhelming. Coming into this video, vague memories of that playthrough were still in the back of my mind, but as always, I'm open to giving games another shot to see if I like them more. That playthrough was itself a few years ago, so maybe playing the game now will open my third eye and allow me to reach enlightenment or some bullshit. Well, after playing it for this review, it's certainly not bad or even simply mediocre by any stretch, but it is somewhat disappointing in a sense. While I said the DS game was an early sign of Mario's decline in mediocrity, it was New Super Mario Bros. Wii where the groundwork was really laid out. This is pretty evident as early as the game begins. Controlling Mario feels pretty much the exact same as the DS original, and I mean exactly the same. I don't know if there's a subtle difference I'm missing, but the physics and control scheme are one and the same between the two. This is good for people used to the control of the DS game, which was solid in the first place, so jumping right into the Wii game is very smooth. As you all know what a platformer is, I don't need to explain Mario's moveset, because just like the control, it's the exact same as the DS original. It gets tiresome writing the same shit over and over again. The only difference worth mentioning is the spin move, which you execute by shaking the Wii remote. Playing this game is done by holding the Wiimote on its side, using its D-pad and 2 of the face buttons like an NES controller. I don't really like how small the buttons are, but it works well enough. Anyway, shaking it causes Mario to do one of two things. In midair, his movement is briefly stalled, and on the ground he does the spin jump from Mario World and Mario Land 2. To be honest, I can't really find many applications for these things, since the midair stall is pathetically short, and the ground pound replaces the original spin jump's ability to break bricks underneath you. I will say that this is a pretty unintrusive use of motion controls, as the game doesn't require pointer controls at all. The pointer controls in the Galaxy games really started to annoy me by the end, because of how often they would fail, so thankfully this game doesn't do that. In fact, the most it will ask you to do is tilt the Wiimote to move platforms or set pieces, which I also found to work way better than anything using motion controls in the Galaxy Duo. So yes, I do in fact think New Super Mario Bros. Wii implements motion controls better than either Galaxy game. Write that on my tombstone, because I will be dead and buried before I change my mind on this. The story and aesthetic aspects are also more of the same from previous Mario entries. Once again, Princess Peach has been taken away by Bowser, and it's Mario's job to get her back. This game at least tries a little bit to make it more interesting by involving the Koopalings again and having them ambush Peach Trojan horse style on a huge cake. But that doesn't change the fact we're recycling the same exact basic story that's been there since '85. Again, Mario prioritizes gameplay above all else. But since then, there were games that varied up their story structure at least a little bit. For example, Super Mario Bros. 2 took place in a dream world, Mario 3 made it seem like the Koopalings were just turning the various kingdoms' rulers into animals, and Peach getting kidnapped was actually a plot twist. Sunshine had the whole pollution thing going on, and Galaxy even went for higher stakes with the whole space and universe getting destroyed thing. Yes, most of those games also revolved around the princess getting captured by Bowser, but they did a much better job hiding that fact. Again, this issue will become far more pronounced in certain later cases, but New Super Mario Bros. Wii is really where this problem became more evident to me. While still a smidge uninspired, at least the graphics and music are pretty decent. The graphics are in a crisp 480p like any Wii game, and there's of course a widescreen. I almost never had problems with horizontal visibility in the previous 2D Mario games, because the enemies were always placed in well enough that such ambushes were rare, but of course the wider view in this game is welcome. The art style is a little bit drab though. It's the exact same look as New Super Mario Bros. On DS, but with a higher resolution. Those same Super Mario Bros. 3 level tropes we've seen a million times are recycled again, from the grassland to the desert to the sky, and it just comes off as a bit lazy and stubborn, even if the visuals are completely serviceable. Oh well, at least the music is pretty good, and about even with the DS game's soundtrack for me. The medias include much more realistic sounding samples because of the larger storage medium, and it's a feast for the ears, except for the fact a lot of the songs are reused from the DS game or remixed from the classics, but those were good songs to begin with, so whatever. The remixes sound great, and all the original tracks are a pleasure to hear while playing the game. My favorite track is probably the map theme of World 9, the secret final world you unlock after beating the game. It's extremely fitting for the mystical rainbow land it takes place in, and even mixes in guitars and some measures from the Mario Kart 64 Rainbow Road theme. It sounds like a song that would play after the conclusion of a long epic journey of sorts. Too bad it's in a simple new Super Mario Bros. Game and not that, but in all seriousness it's a great track. So yeah, while it isn't the most original soundtrack in the world, the highs of the music are pretty good. What's also pretty good is the power-ups, generally at least. The staple Mario power-ups are all here. Unfortunately, the mini mushroom is also back and it's just as useless as it was in the original, but the new additions are pretty handy. The ice flower returns from Galaxy, but here it actually does what you'd expect. However, it's rendered a bit pointless when you get the penguin suit. Yes, the penguin suit. And like the penguins from Super Mario 64, it looks exactly like Chio-chan's penguin costume from Humanity's Greatest Artistic Achievement. Side note, again, but seriously, I can't stress enough how much I love that show. It's so good. But okay. What was I again? Oh yeah. The penguin suit is pretty damn good, as it lets you swim easier like the frog suit from Mario 3 and allows Mario to slide, which is a far superior version of the blue shell from the last game. And it also shoots ice balls, rendering the ice flower basically obsolete. Because of that, there really isn't any reason to use the ice flower whenever you have this power-up. Last but not least is the propeller suit. This power-up lets Mario briefly fly upwards with the shake of the Wiimote. I will admit this can break several sections in half, but I can't lie and say it isn't fun. It's basically the cape feather of this game, offering incredible movement potential. And it's not like it takes no skill to use, because after using the move, you have to fully descend before you can do it again. It's very helpful for platforming if you can use it properly, and I always take the chance to use it when I find one in a question block or whatnot. Yoshi also makes a return in this game. He's fun to play around with, but for whatever reason you can't take him between levels like you could in Super Mario World. Now that's just straight up dumb, but at least he can flutter jump like in Yoshi's Island in all subsequent appearances, which is a handy move to have. The level design is where some things start to bother me a little more though. Now I'm not about to say this game is poorly designed or anything. At its core, this is a completely passable Mario experience, and I'd say it even has higher highs than the DS game. Several stages have exciting set pieces that allow them to stand out, namely the skeleton roller coaster in 8-7, which is a visual marvel for a 2D Mario game. I also like some motion controlled set pieces like the platforms that quickly move from left to right, and other stuff like these Sonic 3-esque icicles. Most of these things allow you to move at your own pace, which is when I find the game is at its best. Those moments where your own level of skill with the controls allows you to speed through platforming sections. It can be hard to put the controller down in these moments. On the other hand, I find that this game is a lot more fond of moments that make you wait around on slow moving objects, such as rafts or elevators, or have to deal with boring auto-scrollers. These pacing issues make certain levels an absolute slog to sit through, because there's such a stark contrast from the faster pacing of the rest of the levels. On occasion, the vertical visibility is also less than ideal, and enemies can drop onto you from above like it's Super Mario Bros. 2 or something. Though to be fair, the DS game also had this problem, and it's infrequent anyway. In general, while this game's levels levels have higher highs than New Super Mario Bros. In the DS, their lows are also a lot lower. The boss fights are something I have similarly mixed feelings about. Most of them, including the Koopalings, are mediocre at best. Just bop them 3 times and you're golden. Kamek's fight is certainly the most interesting, but even he's pretty easy. There is one great boss, however, and that's the final fight against Bowser. Instead of a typical fight where you hit a guy 3 times, it's a full-on platforming section that requires you to break walls in front of you by having Bowser shoot fireballs at them. It sounds easy, but it's actually quite tough. The fight took me around half an hour, but I didn't care. It's a great capstone to this game, and it was really satisfying when I pulled it off. Also, can I just mention how great the theme is? All in all, easily the best boss in a 2D Mario game that I've played so far, and I doubt that will change even once I play the next 2 games. On top of this, New Super Mario Bros. Wii has some extras to sink your teeth into. Obviously there's the multiplayer campaign, which I once again can't record because I'm a lonely fuck, but like the DS game, there's the versus battle modes. Unfortunately, there's no banger minigames like New Super Mario Bros. On DS, but playing these side modes back in the day was fun enough. While this content is nice to have, I don't personally play it much myself. Oh yeah, and on a completely random note, because I didn't have a natural spot to mention it, I remember an experience I had with this game a couple years ago. I was on the World 6 map after finishing a level, and out of nowhere, the game froze on me so hard I had to unplug the power cable for my Wii. It looked a little something like this. It didn't happen on this playthrough, but it scared the shit out of me when it did before. In general, I'm a New Super Mario Bros. Wii centrist. I don't think this game is awful, bad, or crappy or whatever, but I also don't think it's an amazing masterpiece like some people seem to. It's a perfectly serviceable Mario game with fun to be had, but most of what this game does isn't anything you haven't seen before. It also has some pacing problems in its level design and makes frequent use of slow-moving objects you have to wait around on. While this game is certainly solid, and despite the fact it was my first Mario game, it's probably one of the weaker ones I've reviewed so far. However, the real issue would begin within the next several years. While we did get Super Mario Galaxy 2 in 2010, which was great, the 2010s would prove to be a pretty rough era for the Mario series, at least with how I see it. We'll get more into that in the next episode of the marathon with a particular game in the series I'll have some choice words about, but come 2012, this problem would become even more evident. That year, 2 new Super Mario Bros. Games were released within a few months of each other, the first of which being a sequel to the DS game on the 3DS known as New Super Mario Bros. 2. Now, I'm not sure why it's called that when, for all intents and purposes, the Wii game was New Super Mario Bros. 2, but oh crap, I forgot this is Nintendo we're talking about, the company infamous for odd marketing decisions. I want to make it clear, I haven't played either of the next 2 games before doing this marathon, so this is uncharted territory for me. From what I had heard about them, I never thought the price of admission was worth it, even after eventually picking up a console that could play New Super Mario Bros. U. For this video, I didn't actually buy a physical copy of New Super Mario Bros. 2, but rather I played it on Citra, a 3DS emulator. Like New Super Mario Bros., I just have no way of recording handheld games on actual hardware besides aiming a camera at them. Would you really want to watch a video that looks like this? Didn't think so. Emulation it is. By this point, most people were probably tired of New Super Mario Bros. There had been 2 of them that had played essentially the same, and honestly it should have ended at that. 2D Mario had been gradually reintroduced, first with handhelds and then back to the home consoles. At that point, it would have made more sense to go back to making more original 2D Mario games like they did decades ago. But as you know, making sense is not something Nintendo is particularly fond of, so they proceeded to release another New Super Mario Bros. Game that looks practically identical to the other 2. Again, 6 years after 2D Mario had returned and they were still playing it incredibly safe. Yeah, it has that whole coin gimmick or whatever, but that doesn't change the fact this game looked practically identical to its 2 predecessors. I have a theory for this though, and it's 2-pronged. I think it all boiled down to money, first of all, but also the circumstances. Retro nostalgia was a huge element of game design in the 2010s, and a lot of the time creative or experimental ideas were met with vitriol, especially in long-running series. Everyone saw what happened with series like Sonic, and Nintendo seemingly wanted to avoid controversy like that as much as possible, especially since one of the most creative Mario games to date was beginning to garner a bunch of retroactive backlash. These things communicated to them the flawed idea that the only way to succeed was not to try too hard. Instead of making interesting ideas and innovating like they used to, they continuously fell into the trap of making formulaic crowd pleasers that tried their damnedest to avoid any sort of controversy, no matter the cost. All of this is important subtext for the topic of New Super Mario Bros. 2, since this game is often seen as the culmination of, or a sort of monument towards, the laziness and strict over-adherence nostalgia tradition that later Mario games would become infamous for, among fellow more invested enjoyers of the series like myself. I actually haven't played this game before, as I said, but I didn't need to do so to recognize that, even looking in from the outside. They do say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover though, so maybe this game is some underrated Shakespearean classic that I wasn't aware of. Well, after playing the game, I can only say one thing. This game really is just as unoriginal as they say it is, and then some. In fact, this is by far one of the most formulaic, uninventive, by-the-books games I have ever played in my entire life. I get that this probably isn't breaking news to anyone. Like, yeah, New Super Mario Bros. 2 is an unoriginal game. Everyone and their mother knows that by now. You don't even have to play the game to recognize this. However, playing the game is the one true way to experience just how uncreative it is. Even on the surface, this unoriginality becomes apparent, because New Super Mario Bros. 2 has the same exact art style that the other games have. Just look at it and try to tell me this isn't anything you haven't seen before. It's the same grassy fields, deserts, tundras, jungles, and all the other Super Mario Bros. 3 level tropes, looking identical to how they did in the Wii game. I can't say it looks ugly or whatever, but that means nothing when it's the same bland graphical style the other New Super Mario Bros. Games had. That's really disappointing, because these games, with the exception of You-Know-Who, used to look so distinct and memorable. This same copy and paste mentality applies to the soundtrack. It hurts to even call it that, because there isn't a single original piece of music in this game. It's all remixes of songs from past games, or recycled tracks from the previous 2 New Super Mario Bros. Games. I was more or less okay with this in the Wii game, because it only recycled a couple songs while having original pieces. Well, this game takes those original pieces from the Wii game, and just plops them in there like that with no shame. Except there's one thing that makes them nearly insufferable to listen to. Those goddamned vocals. This game is the reason I threw that not-so-subtle jab about this in the segment about the DS entry, because this game has those obnoxious bubbly vocals as one of its main instruments. It actually grates my ears with how bad it could get. Oh god, I didn't ask for an example. Turn it off, turn it off! This is by far the worst Mario soundtrack. Even the worst games in this series have banger music at the very least. This game instead takes songs that were decent and makes them genuinely ear-grating. So sure, my eyes may be completely detached and uninterested, and my ears may have been punctured so hard that I'm bleeding internally, but that stuff doesn't matter so much if the gameplay is inventive and original, right? Well, spoiler alert, it isn't. New Super Mario Bros. 2 is beyond derivative. Any word you could use to describe something unoriginal is applicable and then some to this game. No exaggeration, I can't think of one original idea it has. That one part you have to wall jump to reach a higher platform in one of the castles was cool, but apart from that, it's all bog standard Mario gameplay. Yes, the game is functional, but who cares when it's uninteresting from how overdone everything in it is. There's not one thing in New Super Mario Bros. 2 that previous games haven't done, so it doesn't mean much to me that it works on a technical level. Know what makes it even more boring though? The pacing is even worse than New Super Mario Bros. Wii. In pretty much every stage, there's at least one type of slow moving object you have to wait around on. A lot of these levels essentially become boring auto-scrollers, and no level of skill or experience can speed them up. Yeah, the other games had things like this on occasion, but it's never been as noticeable as it is here, because at least those games had an identity. This is by far the slowest Mario game I've played so far. Did they really think the kids couldn't handle this one? I suppose I should also mention the Coin Gimmick. So this game is advertised with the fact that it's filled to the brim with coins. There's a coin flower that transforms bricks into coins, dedicated coin rings that turn enemies golden and make them spit out the things, and sometimes the stages straight up have coin eruptions and stuff. This was played up to be some huge feature that totally changes the game, but it just doesn't. All it amounts to is there being an above average number of coins in the game, and that's it. At least it's easy to earn extra lives as a result, but man, who the hell cares? I sure don't, because it's a thin veil that poorly attempts to hide just how bland the game is at its core. I just realized I haven't mentioned the story at all, but what is there to say when there's nothing to say? It's the same bland, recycled, overused, hackneyed Mario plot. Peach kidnapped, rescue Peach. That's it. I understand this series has always prioritized gameplay first, but it never blatantly recycled the same exact plot like the new Super subseries does. Sure, Galaxy 2's story was essentially a retread of the first games, but it at least had a few differences. In this subseries, it's literally the Koopalings or whoever waltzing on up and taking the princess away. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Look, I'm not one to demand this grand sweeping narrative and expansive lore in literally everything, as cool as stuff like that may be. I'm just asking for some original ideas and for each game to stand out in a good way. Is that too much to ask for? This is easily one of the most by-the-numbers games I've ever played. By this point, 2D Mario had been re-established for 6 years, so I don't understand why they still decided to play it so damn safe. This game feels like it was the product of countless board meetings and diluted focus tests, engineered to be as safe as possible, because God forbid someone actually has to be challenged challenged. I don't dislike New Super Mario Bros. 2 because it's an exceptionally bad game or whatever. No, I dislike this game because it prides itself on being lazy, on having no original music, nor an interesting visual presentation, nor gameplay with intriguing ideas, not even an original plot line. Before anyone says it, I don't need every game to be some innovative, genre-defining masterpiece. I just can't stand it when a game is so proud of itself for being mediocre, and is thus lacking on all personality and soul. New Super Mario Bros. 2 is one of the most extreme cases of that for me. In my eyes, it's a soulless husk that offers nothing the other games don't do way better and more interestingly. It was an incredibly obvious cash grab. So basically, it's a subversive masterpiece even Shakespeare couldn't come up with. Add it to the list. Alright, I got pretty negative there, I'm sorry. New Super Mario Bros. 2 just left me feeling very empty. And from a series that's provided me with so much fun over the years, that's really disappointing. Say what you will about all the series' other games, but at least they tried and had their own identities. By the time the Wii game released, I'd say the New Super Mario Bros. Series had run its course, and was no longer necessary. But as you know, they still decided to stick to it for some reason. A desire to avoid poor review scores, alienating a small subsector of their audience, God forbid, or whatever it may be. Once New Super Mario Bros. 2 came out though, the more invested consumers began to notice just how stale the games had become. This problem was only exacerbated by the fact that 2012 saw not just one New Super Mario Bros. Game, but two of them. For our final stop on this journey through this sub-series is New Super Mario Bros. U for Wii U. Okay, not quite. I'll be upfront, I don't nor have I ever owned a Wii U. I have considered picking one up eventually, but it never had enough compelling games for me to take the plunge. There is a reason for this that I'll cover in a later video when I discuss the Wii U in more detail, but suffice to say, you all know how that console went. Thankfully, I don't have to totally scrap this marathon, and that's for one simple reason. Nintendo decided that it didn't want many of its first-party Wii U exclusives to rot away in that casket, so they ported them to Switch. Unsurprisingly, that's how I'll be playing this game for the review. Anyways, New Super Mario Bros. U. Hey, that rhymed. Holy shit. Like NSMB 2, I haven't played this game before the marathon, and the reason is simple. I didn't even own a Switch until late 2020, so I couldn't have played it even if I wanted to. When I started the marathon in 2021, I was a bit concerned for when I'd reach this point. I had no idea how I would record the 3DS games because the emulator runs like crap on my main PC, and I thought New Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe cost 60 bucks. Turns out my laptop runs Citra fine enough and I got NSMB U for 40, so basically all that worrying was for absolutely nothing and I was a massive fucking idiot. What else is new? After playing New Super Mario Bros. 2 and hating it because of how bland and unoriginal it was, I was expecting to come into this game and feel much the same. I expected to feel like I totally wasted my money and that the game would be another boring, bland rehash. I'll be honest though, while NSMB U is nothing impressive, for what it is, it's fine. In some aspects, NSMB U tries to break the mold a little bit. It still doesn't end up feeling incredibly original, but at the very least it tries. For one, the plot is a slight shake-up from the other games. Instead of Peach getting taken away, now Bowser comes to her. Incredibly original. Never seen that one before in a Mario game. Okay, in all seriousness, at least it isn't Mario, his friends, and Peach just minding their own business and then the villains suddenly show up. That exact plotline has been recycled over and over in this series ad nauseum, so even the slightest change is appreciated. In this game, Bowser's airship flies to Peach's castle, grabs Mario and friends with a gigantic metallic hand and then flings them far away. In their absence, he takes over the castle, and now Mario has to make his way back and stop him. I like how this time around, it's Bowser invading rather than taking Peach to his location. Even if Super Mario 64 had a very similar scheme of taking over the castle like I sarcastically pointed out, but there I go again with my nitpickery. No, this doesn't mean I think this game's story is some radical reinvention, but I am glad it isn't the same exact copy-paste plot from the other NSMB games to a T. Similarly, the visuals attempt to have a little variation. From a purely objective point of view, this game is easily the best looking of the subseries. Believe it or not, this was actually the first Mario game in HD. Well, if you still consider 720p to be HD these days, but you know what I mean. All Mario games before this point had a maximum resolution of 480p, which needs to be upscaled in some way to look good. By contrast, all you need for this is an HDMI cable and you're golden. The Switch port is even better in this regard, as its resolution was upgraded to 1080p when in dock mode. My only objective complaint is that the character models look polygonated when viewed up close, which thankfully isn't particularly often. However, with that said, the art style is still more or less the same as the other games. Sorry, I really want to say this is some wholeheartedly super original looking game that brings the NSMB series to new aesthetic heights, but I have to be honest, it just isn't. That's a shame, because I can tell the team wanted to make it look more interesting. The backgrounds are quite nice looking. There's neat set pieces like these statues that show up every now and then, and I like how the world map is interconnected a la Super Mario World. They tried, they really did. It's just that the NSMB template is very limiting, considering it's founded so heavily on nostalgia and familiarity. When you look past these things, the level tropes are the same they've been for this whole sub-series. Grassy fields, deserts, deserts, tundras, and so on and so forth. Really, this entire game feels like New Super Mario Bros. Wii up-res to HD in a lot of ways, which for the first Mario game in high definition is underwhelming. I have similar mixed feelings about the soundtrack. Like New Super Mario Bros. Wii, it's made up of both recycled songs and some new material, albeit way less new stuff than that game. Oddly enough, most of the reused music is actually from the Wii game, where it was originally new music. I would be more irritated by this if this game pulled a New Super Mario Bros. 2 and featured absolutely zero original songs, but at least it has some. That godforsaken overworld track from the DS game was finally ditched for something new, as was the athletic theme, and there's a couple new tracks here and there. It's slightly refreshing, but honestly the style of the music is still rather generic by Mario standards. While New Super Mario Bros. Wii also reused melodies from the DS game, at least it remixed them with better sounding instruments. Here, the new songs use very similar instrumentation to the reused stuff, and it doesn't really stand out. I will say though, I do like how the theme for the final world map is a sinister rearrangement of the Peach's Castle theme from SM64. So that's cool. As for how the game plays, well, it's a New Super Mario Bros. Game. I don't really know what else new I can say at this point. These 4 games just play so similarly that talking about one pretty much describes the gameplay for all of them. That of course includes the controls, which feel identical to New Super Mario Bros. Wii. I say that specifically because you have the spin jump, which can be executed by pressing either the R button or shaking the controller. Honestly, I think this is the most comfortable mapping this move has seen yet, as you don't have to move your thumb across the face buttons or do a button combo. I'm also glad you aren't required to shake the controller to do it, which means you can play this whole game with a regular controller, except for when these motion exclusive set pieces come in at the end of the game. They force you to switch to the Joy-Cons with their shitty D-pad, and it's irritating every single time it makes you do it. Of course, this wouldn't be a problem on the Wii U where you can just play with the Wiimote, but never mind that part. This game plays well control-wise, but that isn't news because that's also the case for pretty much every game in the series, those few notable exceptions aside. On that note, I should probably mention the power-ups briefly. Most are taken from New Super Mario Bros. Wii, so it isn't worth commenting on them in detail, but there is one new and interesting one, that of course being the Super Acorn. Basically, this is the game's take on those flight power-ups the older ones had, such as the Raccoon Leaf. By the way, that thing came back in New Super Mario Bros. 2, but I didn't bother mentioning it because it added nothing for me. Here though, it's at least somewhat neat. You can hold the jump button to glide like your Knuckles, and can press R to get a shot of upward momentum. It also lets you hold onto walls for a brief moment, so you can plan wall jumps easier. All around, I like this power-up, but I wouldn't call it a game changer. It's just pretty handy in some situations. Alongside this, baby Yoshis from Mario World make a return, alongside Yoshi himself. Yoshi is exactly the same as in the Wii game, and the baby Yoshis can eat enemies for you, which is what they did in Super Mario World. But here, as far as I know, they don't grow up when you feed them enough. That's made up for with their additions to your moveset, such as allowing you to briefly float in midair or see in dark places. Now that's more like it. Now, the level design in this game is something I feel is somewhat tricky to write about, which may seem odd considering how much weight I consider it to have in a platformer. It's because, well, what can I really say that I haven't said about the other games? Yes, the stage design in this game is solid, but to me it's sorta generically good, if that makes sense. I can sit here and tell you it has a certain amount of hidden secrets, and that the world map has a decent amount of choice, that the set pieces are solid, and all that other stuff, but doing that feels like I'm saying the same shit over and over again. And I basically am. This game is designed well, but it's for the same exact reasons as every other 2D Mario game I've praised up to this point. I said this game feels like the Wii game in HD for a reason, since most of its stage ideas are reused from that game. Not to say there isn't anything new, such as these gigantic geyser-like water spouts, these weird star platforms, and stuff like that, but those are the exception and not the rule. If this game improves anything over New Super Mario Bros. Wii, it doesn't have as many slow-moving set pieces that require you to just sit there and wait, which is appreciated. It still has tedious water stages though, which are always a buzzkill. The bosses are kind of the same way, and I can't call them anything but mediocre. Well, except for the Bowser fight, but even that doesn't stack up to his appearance in the Wii game. So yeah, the base game is fine but derivative, but believe it or not, this isn't the true ending of the New Super Mario Bros. Series. 1 year later, for the Year of Luigi event, Nintendo released a bunch of games themed around the portly plumber's skinnier brother. Among these was a new Luigi's Mansion game, another entry in the Mario and Luigi series, and of course, new Super Luigi U, an expansion pack for NSMB. Originally, I didn't know if I would cover this, but since NSMB Deluxe includes it as an extra, why the hell not? Even though this is a Mario retrospective, I might as well give his brother his due spotlight. After playing the expansion, I honestly think I prefer it to the base game. Put simply, what it does with the New Super Mario Bros. Formula is way more compelling. New Super Luigi U follows the same story and world map as the original, but with new remix stages that are way more difficult. In fact, some of them have a similar level of challenge to the older games, if not more so. After playing all 4 of these fairly easy games back to back, this was pretty refreshing. Now, it isn't perfect. In a select few cases, Luigi's physics really got in the way and made it way too easy to slip off platforms. I also hated several of the boss fights because jumping on them is way too precise for Luigi's floaty ass jump. Apart from these frustrations, I had way more fun with these much shorter and more challenging level designs. Given how long the stages in these games were getting, it's refreshing to play something closer in length to Super Mario Bros. 3, honestly. I'd still say I prefer the DS and Wii entries over NSLU, which is probably just the nostalgia talking, but either way, it's a good expansion. That really does it for New Super Mario Bros. U. I would never say this game is bad, but it certainly isn't unique. It can be enjoyed if you shut your brain off and examine it in a vacuum, but when factoring in the other games, it becomes way harder to do that. I care about this series a lot. It was probably the first series I ever loved in gaming, so it's hard for me to completely drown out that nagging voice in the back of my head that says, hey, remember when this series did more original things and didn't constantly copy and paste itself? I said it already, but I'll say it again. I don't need every game to be some innovative masterpiece. All I'd like is for each game to stand out. That's all. While New Super Mario Bros. U certainly tried to seem more original, this template they've stuck to since 2006 meant the game's creative potential was severely limited. Yeah, the new Super Luigi U expansion pack was intriguing, but at the end of the day, it's basically just a ROM hack of the original, using the same music and visual style. Really, these games kind of just feel like ROM hacks of each other, if I'm going to be blunt about it. This game didn't make me feel nearly as empty as New Super Mario Bros. 2 after finishing it, but I can't say I was impressed by it. It and its expansion are fine games. They just don't really stand out. Like I said, I really want to be able to say that this is super original and refreshing, but I just can't. And that's a damn shame. I've been rambling about these games for way longer than I ever expected to. I can talk and talk all I want, but my point in the matter is plain and simple. I wouldn't call any of these games objectively poorly made or anything like that. At the very least, they're playable, but that in itself is not impressive, and therein lies the issue with this subseries. Following the breakout success of the DS entry, which itself succeeded in an era of diminishing financial returns, the executives learned the wrong lesson. They were convinced that Mario had to stick to a certain list of tropes and conventions, no matter if they were recycled ad nauseum, to be successful. It certainly didn't help that some of the series' more creative and interesting games were starting to garner a largely negative reputation, only further reinforcing the attitude of playing it safe and taking zero risks. This would go on to affect all branches of the series, spin-off or otherwise, but the mainline platformers is where I can say it definitively started. As I said in this video, these games are overall decent. New Super Mario Bros. 2 is a blight to this series, and a true monolith to absolute laziness that I completely despise, while the other games are at the very least fine, but Jesus Christ, if there was an entry in the dictionary for too much of a good thing. All these games have the same visual style, a lot of the same music, the same story recycled over and over, the same generic enemies, the works. The craziest part is how the DS, Wii, and Wii U games have at least 3 years in between each other, and yet they feel like yearly releases with how little changes between the three. This sub-series is the Call of Duty of Mario. It blows my mind how back in the day, Mario games could come out within 1 year of each other and feel completely distinct in presentation, aesthetics, gameplay, and whatnot, and on much less powerful hardware to boot. Yet they can't for the life of them make an original 2D game in 3 years in the modern day. By 2012, the new in these games titles was a complete lie, because there's nothing new about any of these games. They're all the same tropes we've seen 1,000 times, and as a result, they hold so much less replay value than most of the series' other games. I get it, this isn't a shocking revelation, but that's how I feel about this sub-series. And this is coming from someone who's heavily nostalgic for the first two. That's it for these games, and, well, looks like I didn't keep my promise in the Mario Galaxy 2 review. Are you surprised? Because you shouldn't be. Either way, it was way more fun playing and talking about them than I expected. I did get sick of the sub-series by the end like I expected, but the first two are a neat nostalgia trip at the very least. Anyways, for the next video in this marathon, I'll more than likely be delivering the payoff for something I've been building up to since very early on. You may not know what I'm talking about, but it's something I was considering since the start of this entire thing over a year ago, and next time I'm finally covering it. I'll just stop up with the awful attempt at subtlety and say it's Super Mario 3D Land. That's the next Mario game I'm covering. I've made my thoughts on that particular entry no secret in some past videos, but it's a game I haven't actually played in years, so it's anyone's guess what I'll think of it by the end. You may be expecting me to say that the marathon is going on hiatus again, but not this time. I do have several other videos in the pipeline, well, in the form of unfinished scripts, and some are just ideas right now. But whatever the next one is, I've come to realize that I really don't have a shortage of ideas, especially for someone who only uploads maybe once a month or so on average. That said, I just want to do 3D Land next because, well, this marathon has taken enough extended breaks already. I have to buckle down, focus, and get this done at some point, because at this rate, I'm going to be out of college by the time this thing is over with. So I'm putting those other ideas on indefinite hold until this marathon is over and done with. I have opinions on some of these later games I'm looking forward to sharing, and I hope you'll be along for the rest of the ride. I've been Diamond Miner Studios, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
This is not okay. It's time to stop. It's time to stop.